G'day guys, this is Rebalancing speaking and welcome to today's video. Firstly, you've probably noticed the new intro to my videos. I've spent probably the better part of a week trying to put that together and find some music that I actually liked to put to it. So I went with the war drums and I think it sounds pretty cool. So yeah, let me know what you think about that first and foremost. But that's not the reason for today's video. Today's video I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. I want to talk about carriers. Now, carriers have been a bit of a bone of contention, well, for quite some time now, especially since the American aircraft carriers were nerfed and they had a torpedo bomber squadron taken off them. I certainly remember the days of the Midway with 2 torpedo bomber squadrons, and it was quite deadly. I was fortunate enough to play that version of the Midway on the PTS before they took those away in patch 0.3 something 4, I think it was, and it was a lot of fun to play. Not so much fun to play against though. But anyway, for today I'm going to use the Lexington and the Shokaku as my examples because they're what I've unlocked, and I want to talk about how I would go about I guess revamping or rebalancing carriers, which is probably a better term for it. So we're going to start off with the Lexington because, well, the Ranger and the Lexington, they've got the worst stats of any aircraft carrier, I think on any server really. Shokaku seems to dominate all tier 8 CVs at the moment, and I think it's going to stay that way for quite some time. But anyway, here is what I would do. Now, to understand sort of what I'm going to be getting at, let's have a look at how the modules and everything are laid out. So we've got the hull upgrade, we've got the 3 types of aircraft which you can upgrade. That's all fine. The issue is these flight controls right here. So stock flight control, you've got a 111 loadout. Okay, so you got 1 fighter, 1 load of torpedo bombers, 1 load of dive bombers. So not huge strike and defense potential, but you still have the ability to strike and defend. And I think that is the biggest issue with American aircraft carriers at the moment, because when you go on to selecting your next flight mod, you have to choose between the two. You either have to choose the ability to strike or the ability to defend with a reduced capacity to strike. The RNG on dive bombers is, well, yeah, unless you've absolutely mastered the technique of manual dive bomber drops, your strike potential is severely limited. So how would I fix this? Well, here's what I would do. You see down the bottom here, you've got your 4 squadrons of aircraft. I've got the 202 loadout on this because it's more conducive to team play and helping your team out, whereas the strike isn't. I think the strike loadout is a very selfish loadout. You're only concerned about doing damage to get the XP for yourself. You don't have the ability to defend against another carrier or defend your team against another carrier, and I think that's what annoys a lot of people about American aircraft carriers, and especially people who take the strike loadout. I actually know a guy who actually reports any CV with a strike loadout for poor gameplay simply because he considers it extremely selfish. This is American CVs, by the way, not the Japanese ones. I'll get to those ones shortly. But I mean, I don't go as far as reporting people, but I would have to agree that a strike package on a Ranger or Lexington is not helping your team out. You're very susceptible to enemy fighter squadrons basically taking out your planes and completely diminishing your ability to do any damage at all, because you have no ability to defend your strike package trying to get through. So how would I do it? Alright, I would link it into your hull upgrades. So mentioned before, a hull and the stock upgrade. So what I would do is I would tie this stock loadout to the A hull. So you've got fighters, torpedo bombers, and dive bombers. Then once you upgrade to the B hull, you get an extra slot for an extra squadron. Now this is where I would change it. With that final slot, you give people the choice to take either a fighter squadron or a dive bomber squadron. I wouldn't want to give them the ability to take a second torpedo bomber squadron. I think that those of us who have been playing, for the last 2 years certainly remember what a double torpedo bomber squadron US aircraft carrier was like to play against. It was not fun at all. You just get instantly deleted straight away. So you cap the torpedo bombers at 1, and you allow a person to take either a fighter squadron or a dive bomber squadron. So you're still retaining the ability to strike and the ability to defend at the same time. You're not making people choose between the two, and I think it's a much more balanced loadout than what we've currently got here, whereas one we've got no fighters, and then on the other we've got no torpedo bomber squadrons. Now I still hear people say, oh, but they still got dive bomber squadrons. Well, yeah, that's true, but they're just so heavily reliant on RNG, they're not reliable or as reliable as a squadron of torpedo bomber squadrons. So if even if you've got one fighter squadron, you've got torp bomber squadron and 2 dive bomber squadrons, okay, it's a strike loadout, but you still got the ability to defend. You still got a set of fighters with which you can help defend your team, help defend your aircraft. Granted, it would be a little bit more difficult, but you would still have that ability. So, also how I would run this 4th slot is similar to the upgrades. So let's say, these first 3 upgrades are your, 111 loadout, and then here you're taking, your 4 squadron, whatever you decide. If you want to change it out, make it the same as the upgrades. So say I want to change that out, I'm charged 25 doubloons and a credit cost for swapping out, say, a set of dive bombers for a set of fighters, or vice versa. You enact a penalty that way on the player for wanting to change that loadout. I think it's probably a much better way to manage this compared to what we've already got. And I just think it would help to rebalance American carriers, well, any carrier really, for that matter, a little bit better if they at least have one of each squadron tied to the aircraft, and then any additional modules that open up, the person gets a choice as to what they want to take, as opposed to being told, no, we're going to give you, these aircraft, but you're going to lose these ones instead. I don't understand the logic behind that at all. I really, really don't. So, let's go up to the next one. Let's go up to the Essex, for example. Okay, here again you've got A hull, B hull, you've got your stock loadout. So there you've got 4 squadrons of aircraft. When you pick the next 2 mods, you get given an extra one, so you've got at least 5. But again, there with the air subspec, you've got no strike power. It's the same as the Lexington and the Ranger. And here, okay, you've got 1 torpedo bomber squadron and 3 dive bomber squadrons and 1 fighter squadron. Okay, that's not as bad as what you've got on the Lexington, but it's still very restrictive in that. So again, you tie that 5th slot or into the B hull, so you can pick either another fighter or another dive bomber squadron, and again cap the torpedo bombers at 1 squadron, and then you do the same thing again for the Midway. Now the Midway's only got the A hull, and it's still 5 aircraft per slot. You know, you're not losing any squadrons, but I think just that, even that standard loadout there, the 2-1-2, is probably the most balanced of all the flight control systems. No one's going to take either of the other two, because you just lose either potential damage or potential defense with it. So, you know, being the tier 10, you shouldn't have to upgrade anything. You just lock it in altogether, whilst still being able to upgrade, obviously, your aircraft. Now, if we go across to the Shokaku, okay, again, you've got 2 hull upgrades here. So, you know, your stock, you know, you got 5 squadrons. So instead of having 5 squadrons, maybe make it 4 with like a 1-2-1 loadout. So you've still got your torpedo bomber squadrons, but you just take away a dive bomber squadron. And then with each of these hull upgrades, you add an extra slot. So, you know, you have your stock standard 4, and then with the B hull, you get your 5th. And then with the C hull, you get your 6, and you load them up how you want. Again, cap the torpedo bomber squadron so it's not overpowered. So, you know, you would cap it at 2, and then person would have a choice to take either, you know, an extra 2 dive bomber squadrons, or maybe, you know, an extra fighter, you know, 1 or 2 extra fighter squadrons as well, because, you know, here you got a 3-1-2 loadout, which, okay, that's still a pretty good loadout in my opinion. You've still got the ability to strike, you've still got the ability to defend, and then with this one you've got a 2-2-2 loadout, which again is so perfectly balanced. You've got the ability to defend, strike, you know, you've got the ability to engage in that team play, and this is why the Shokaku is so successful at this tier compared to the Lexington, because it's just so well balanced in that regard. So, look, I also think that's why there's been such an issue with the Graf Zeppelin as well, and not so much the way it was released, but because it's just lacking that potential for strike versus defense. It's got a 203 loadout, so 2 fighters and 3 dive bomber squadrons. It relies so heavily on RNG in order to do its damage. And say, oh, but you know, it's got AP bombs, but well, yeah, but they're only effective against battleships. They're not effective against cruisers or destroyers. Like, once all the battleships are taken out of the game, you've lost that strike potential. And then you get the arguments, so, well, use HE then. Well, yeah, you can use HE, but you're not going to get the strike damage that an AP bomb is going to give you. So I just think with any carrier, especially at this sort of level, at tier 8, at least, you know, all the carriers should have at least locked in 1 of each type of aircraft. So, and then for the remainder of the squadrons, give the people the ability to choose what they want to choose in the manner that I've just demonstrated. I think it would take a little bit of pressure off CV players. CV players are generally held responsible for either a win or a loss, and the attitude towards CV players, especially those that play American CVs, is also generally pretty poor, because they just lack that balance when compared to the Japanese carriers. So, Wargaming, if you ever happen to stumble across this video, please have a think about what I've said. I did actually watch a Q&A today with, I think, Phelan and Evan, when they did mention briefly that they were looking at completely removing, or potentially removing, carriers from the game, rebalancing them, putting them back in. I don't know if that has any legs, but I genuinely think what I've just run through has potential, and I genuinely think should be considered as an option for an attempt to rebalance this part of the game. So anyway, that's just my thoughts on how I would go about fixing carriers. I'm generally pretty happy with the actual gameplay of carriers as far as manual drops and, the RTS type look down window that you get when playing carriers. I don't have an issue with that at all. What I have an issue with is how the carriers are loaded out, and that needs to be addressed first and foremost before anything else. Okay guys, so that concludes today's video. Please let me know what you think, whether or not you agree or disagree, or even if you have a different idea. You know, if someone else has an absolutely fantastic idea on what they would do, you know, I'm happy to take that feedback as well, and perhaps put it into another video a little bit later on. But for now, I think I'll just leave that where it is. As always, take care of yourselves, and I'll catch you all later. Ciao.